Good morning and welcome to another Conversations with Carrie. Today we're continuing with our topic of loss, grief, and mourning. I hope the topics that we've covered so far have been very therapeutic for you. And if you find it beneficial, we once again ask that you support the channel by liking and sharing, and also feel free to leave your comments and questions, and we'll get back to you on that. Now, just to recapitulate, what is loss? Loss is anything of value that was in your existence or your experience and then is no longer. And grief is that feeling that the person gets when they suffer a loss. And mourning is the manifestation of that grief. Mourning is the expression of that grief. Mourning is what persons do in direct response to the feeling of grief that they have. Now, today we're going to be talking about the stages of grief. Whenever someone suffers a loss, there is the feeling of grief. And the feeling of grief has different stages. Sometimes it's called levels, but the academic term is stages of grief. And there are, postulations about the number of stages, etc. But it's generally accepted that there are 5 stages of grief, and those are the ones where we're going to be speaking about today. However, in addition to telling you the stages of grief, we're going to explain how the stages work and what we can do at each stage, okay? How to recognize the stages and how we can support persons who are going through the stages of grief. Let us be clear that persons, they express their grief differently. That does not mean that they do not go through all the stages of grief. As a matter of fact, it's very important to note that the 5 stages of grief, persons go through it systematically. Stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4, then stage 5. They don't jump from stage 1 to stage 3 or from stage 1 to stage 5. All right. Also to note is that persons can regress. They can go through stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, and then regress back to stage 1 and start over again. All right. And we've seen people do this. There are actually some persons who never get to stage 5 because of these reasons. They keep getting to a stage and then regress into the first again. And it happens like this. And you'll understand once we get to explaining the different stages. Another thing to note is that persons go through the stages at different pace. Some persons may go through the stages in minutes, and some may take years to go through the stages. All right, meaning from stage 1 to stage 5. While, interestingly enough, there are some persons who may go through one stage very quickly, but there is a delay in another stage, all right, or different timelines to go through other stages. So there's nothing hard and fast other than the fact that there are 5 stages and persons go through them systematically. All right. So let's get into it. The first stage of grief is denial. You get the news or you recognize the loss and you cannot believe it. Persons think, oh, there must be a mistake. This cannot be happening. And during this phase, persons will, for example, if it's information about loss of health, they may go to other doctors to see, is this really true? All right, so this is the stage of denial. All right, or they wake up and they're thinking, oh my, this happened to me, it cannot be me, and they try to wipe it from their minds and say, no, this did not happen. All right, then the second stage is anger. And anger is when they begin to question, why. They look at the things that they could have done differently. Sometimes they try to place blame even on themselves. right? And so they get angry at people, they get angry at places, they get angry at things. Remember, this is a natural phase of the grieving process. All right. So first is denial, second anger. Then the third stage is bargaining. And bargaining is where they're saying, okay, maybe if I do this, this will change, or maybe if I, do something else, and they start to make promises and commitments, etc. All right. And so during the bargaining phase, they try to form new agreements. Okay, I'll, take better care of my health. I will love the people around me more. Things like that. That's the bargaining phase um, of grief. And then it goes to depression. Depression is when they begin to realize that, hey, this is true. It is not going away. This is something that is here, and they begin to feel helpless. They wish there was something else they could have done. All right. During this phase, they may be very confused, or the confusion will come in because the prevailing question is why me? All right. They may have difficulty concentrating. They may even have physical pain. All right. And they will have changes in sleeping pattern. Now, depression during the phase of grief can go away. As the person successfully grieve, it will go away. But with persons who get stuck in this area, then after a while it becomes what is considered clinical depression, and then they will need medication. Okay, so this phase of depression is where sometimes a lot of people get really stuck, and then before you know it, they have a medical diagnosis of depression. But remember, depression doesn't have to be a medical diagnosis. It could just be a phase of the grieving process that persons can pass through. All right. And then after depression, you have acceptance. And acceptance is where they're beginning now to recognize that this is true, this is not going away. And then here is where they become willing to learn what to do next. All right, they begin to get clarity of the situation, and they are better able to now address the situation. Okay, for us to assist persons going through grief, it's very important for us to recognize the stage of grief that they are in. And we've already established the five stages. Number one is denial. Number two is anger. And let me tell you, sometimes the anger is even directed towards God. Okay, so denial, anger, bargaining, want to work it out. Maybe if I do something, this will go away, it will no longer be my truth. And then depression, and finally acceptance. Now, acceptance seems as if it's the last academic stage, but the last academic stage is the beginning of the acceptance, the beginning of getting into the things of life. All right, and that now is another phase that typically persons do not get support through. And I believe that this is why persons will, year after year, when it comes around to the same time, will go into grieving again, or if they see someone familiar, may go into grieving again. All right, because they got to acceptance, but they never moved past acceptance into really engaging all the things of life and moving into forgiveness, which is forgiving self, forgiving others. All right, and unless you get to that stage, then you're going to be in a cycle. All right, of experiencing this grief. All right, so what can we do? At every stage of the grieving process, hope needs to be communicated. Not false hope now, realistic hope. Realistic hope. All right, and so when they are in denial, okay, which is the first stage, we need to allow them to express their feelings, ask questions, but it's for us to answer compassionately, and for us to answer honestly. All right. It is also for us to uh, support them with any activities that they may want. Typically, I'm sure you've seen this even on TV, where persons are delivering news and they say, have a seat, and they offer them water or something to drink. Okay, it's because the denial is that moment of disbelief, and persons become discombobulated. Sometimes they hear the first two words and then everything else is just this. All right, they're not hearing everything. And that is why during the stage of denial, they may not necessarily get to the entire information. So we have to be there, we have to be willing to answer questions, okay, that they may have, and also to give them information, okay, to give them information. Sometimes we'll give them statistics to say, hey, statistics show that persons with this diagnosis, usually is successfully treated, or persons who've gone through this experience, uh, they can successfully move through the stages of grief and go on to live a productive life. And this experience may also be your way of helping someone who may be going through this next time. Okay, so this first denial, uh, you know, it takes as long as it takes for the person, and it is for us to be there, be present, to respond to questions, to offer support, to offer hope, and to respond with compassion and with honesty. And when it comes to the second stage, which is anger, this is the part that's usually very difficult, especially for caregivers. Because here you've never met this person before, you walk in the room, you're pleasant, and you say, good afternoon, so and so, and they were like, bow, and they unleash a fury of anger on you. We want to remember that the anger is not towards you. All right, they don't know you. Um, they have nothing against you, okay, but they are the one that's experiencing the anger. All right, and it's very important for them to express themselves. As long as we don't accept the anger as directed towards us, we're in a better position to support them actually through this phase. A lot of persons get discarded, it's an unfortunate term, but gets discarded during this term because persons cannot understand this expression of grief, and persons will get angry and say, why are they pushing us away? We're just trying to help. Yes, you're just trying to help, but they also have to process information or a knowledge and an experience that they may have never experienced before, or even if they've experienced it before, it may not be at this level. All right, so when a person is angry, we still want to be there, we want to give them their space, but we still continue to offer hope, we still continue to offer tangible support. We mentioned before, one of the ways we can do it is to offer them food, help them with any activities that they were typically responsible for, like with childcare, housekeeping, taking some time off from work, things like that, to grieve. There are a lot of persons who are going through different types of grief that we're going to be talking about later, who do come to work just the same. And it makes the grieving process longer and more painful. However, some persons grieve, as we say, in silence. And so it will take the discerning eye to recognize when a person is grieving. Because some persons, they have pride so great, all right, that they don't want to. Some persons stay away, and that's okay. However they want to express their grief, it's fine. But when it comes to the stage of anger, it's very important that the supporting family member, that the caregiver, that the persons who are providing support recognize that this expression of anger is not about them. It's a natural phase of the grieving process that the person has to go through. All right, so that's anger. And then during the bargaining stage, now the bargaining stage is a really nice stage. Here's where they become actually more cooperative. Here is where they're willing to now listen. Here is where you, as you're encouraging them to begin to participate in self-care, then they begin to be more willing. too. And for a time during the bargaining phase, they may seem, you know, bright and feel it may be as if they've gotten to the stage of acceptance, but not so far. Very many persons uh, go quickly into depression. Actually, depression is the next phase. And why it's very important to recognize this phase and not to be alarmed when they go to the depression is usually persons who commit suicide. You will always hear persons say, "Oh, but they seemed so alive, they seemed ready, they seemed." However, medically, we have been um, taught that here is the time when the person will need the most supervision during the stage of bargaining. Okay, because after bargaining, they're going into depression. And during depression, you know, we mentioned before, they become confused, they are not able to make decisions, etc. And for some persons, the levels of depression may be different. And now depression can move from just a stage of grief into a clinical situation that will require treatment, medication, supervision, and things like that. And once again, that's an entire lesson all by itself. But for the stage of the grieving, during the stage of depression, here is where, even though yesterday they seemed happy and cooperative, this is a day when they have no energy to do anything. And it's during this depression stage that they're going to, it's such a fine balance. They're going to need their space, but it has to be a safe space, okay? A space where they can express themselves, a space where they will not be inclined to do harm to themselves or to others. All right, and so being present, okay, but not intrusive, giving support in all the areas that we've identified that support may be needed for personal care, for even for maintaining health. Some persons will stop taking their medications. All right, so during this phase, they may need assistance with all of that, with food, with eating, childcare, etc. Okay, and then when it goes to acceptance, acceptance is usually a time when they're coming out of depression and they're like, okay, yes, they recognize, but they're not going to be suddenly on top of the world and participating. It is still a process. During the acceptance phase is actually like a reintroduction. Here is where now they are saying, okay, I will do what it takes to maintain my health, to heal, to forgive, things like that. And so it is also a phase, all right, that has to be walked out. As I said before, some persons may go through the stages, each 5 of them, very quickly. An example is someone who has, say, an optimistic spirit, and they're sitting in the doctor's chair, and the doctor said, this is your diagnosis. And right there and there, they can go through denial, they can go through anger, they can go through bargaining, they can go through depression, and then they can finally say, okay, doctor, how do we beat this thing? That would be acceptance. All right. And so it is very important, once again, for persons, for them to successfully grieve, for the persons who are supporting them to be aware of these stages, to be able to recognize, based on the descriptors that I gave today, what stage of depression they're in and how we can support them. But in every stage, they need to be given realistic hope. All right, so thank you for spending this time with me. The next time, we are going to be speaking about the types of grief. And once again, you really want to hear the types of grief. All right, because it's real interesting and eye-opening. And you will begin to recognize that not all grief is grief. And you will also get to recognize that there are some persons who are grieving who do not feel worthy to be grieving. And sometimes society deems them also unworthy of grieving. However, grief is a feeling that any human being who suffered a loss will feel. And so we're going to talk about that in the next video. So thank you for joining me today on Conversations with Carrie. I look forward to seeing you in the next video.